Dan, are you able to hear? And you're sharing your screen, right?
I can hear you now. I'm not sharing my screen yet.
Okay. And Dan, I did the intro. I must not have been talking into the mic loud enough.
Okay.
So, it's over to you and Kelly.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I think you might have been on mute.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So you've given the introduction, Chris?
Yep.
Okay. So I'll just mention that I'm Daniel Rubens with Fear and Peers, the project manager for this project. I'm joined by Kelly and Ian. And Kelly will give the first part of this presentation, then I'll give the next part, and Chris will finish us off.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Hello. It's nice to see a lot of familiar faces virtually in the room. And I know a lot of you have engaged on this project already. So hopefully this will be an exciting update for many of you on how this is going. Okay, so we'll just dive right in, starting with the project goal for this project. So the primary goal for the project is to identify ways for land development projects in the county to mitigate their VMT impacts. And the program is meant to help provide a more cohesive approach to VMT mitigation actions by expanding the options at a county-wide scale. And I'll just note that we did have our own technical advisory committee for this project, which a few of you were on, comprised of city and county staff, and also engaged with other key stakeholders that we'll talk about later, but they've all helped to shape this program and have influenced where it is today. Okay, so this is just a snapshot of the project progress. You can see we're about 2/3 of the way done here in June of 2025. We've met with our TAC many times for the project. We have completed a number of stakeholder workshops and interviews, getting to hear more one-on-one from people. And we've drafted more recently the report, and that is something that we'll continue to refine as we get feedback today from you all. And we heard from the SCTCA's PAC this morning, got some feedback from them. And then we will also be hosting our second demonstration workshop later this summer. And that feedback will also help to refine the report. Go to the next slide. Okay, so we'll just start with a little bit of information about VMT if this is a newer topic to anyone, or just as a quick refresher before we dive into the nitty-gritty. So a vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, is a measure of the total amount of driving that's happening in an area. So it doesn't matter how many people are in the car. If one car drives 10 miles, it's 10 VMT. If 4 cars go 10 miles, that's 40 VMT. It's a multiplier. And so recent state law, which Chris might have mentioned, he did this morning. We just didn't hear the intro, but recent changes to state law have required that cities and counties use VMT to evaluate new development. And so that's part of why we're here talking about this today. Go to the next slide. Great, so VMT can be reduced through a combination of different strategies. At the project level, site design and local context play a role there. At the community level, improvements in public transportation and infrastructure help to shift travel behavior. And at the regional level, land use planning and large-scale transportation programs can contribute to long-term reductions. And so the proposed VMT mitigation program that we're talking about falls under that regional and program measures category on the screen there. The next slide. Okay, so now we'll talk about the different program options. So we started out by looking at the different ways to mitigate VMT, whether through capital improvements, services, or programs. And so if we think about capital improvements, that's physical infrastructure. I'm sure you all are very familiar with that. And so that could be an example, transit service expansion. So you can see in the photo there, that's an example of maybe a bus route that is now near some new development. So not adding just a new bus shelter, but really expanding that transit route. If thinking about services, an example would be extending transit hours or increasing the route frequency. And finally, programs, thinking about things like subsidized transit passes. And so these all fall under one of 3 different program options, whether that be a bank, exchange, or fee-based. And you can see on the screen there that fee-based is specific to capital improvement projects. And so it's just kind of something to note, and I'll talk more on the next slide about that. So there are trade-offs each programs. You'll see on this graph here, the 3 different program types mapped over the complexity of establishing and maintaining that program, and as well as the flexibility of the strategies that it allows for. So an impact fee program, relatively familiar and easy to understand. It has a lower administrative burden to implement, but it can only be used to fund capital improvement projects, as we just saw on the last slide. A VMT exchange program is more flexible, moderate amount of administrative burden to maintain the list of VMT mitigation projects. It can fund all 3 capital improvement services and programs, but applicants must fully fund a mitigation action themselves. They can't share it between different developments, so that limits flexibility a little bit. And then the third option is a VMT bank, and that is flexible in the projects that it can deliver, but it has the most administrative burden. So there is an option to split funding between applicants. So a single transit route expansion, for example, could be split between multiple development projects, but it is a little harder to implement from an administrative perspective. And it can also fund all 3 capital, service, and programs. And so why an exchange and not a bank? We are moving forward to explore an exchange. A lot of that is due to what I just mentioned around the administrative burden and how easy it is to set up and maintain. The main task with an exchange is maintaining that list of VMT mitigation projects to be implemented. And we also considered the feedback we heard on the types of mitigation actions that our TAC, Project TAC, would like to have included. And so that kind of informed the type of program that we would move forward with, which ultimately ended up being an exchange. And so I'll pass it over to Dan, who's going to talk a little bit more in depth around what that would look like.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. So I'm going to demonstrate what the VMT exchange can, how it might operate. But I want to kind of emphasize this slide here that one of the first parts of coming to the decision around or recommendation around a VMT exchange is identifying the types of VMT mitigation actions that this program could serve and that would be beneficial to your local communities. So that is these 3 VMT mitigation action categories of capital improvement services and programs. There's a desire for a variety of different VMT mitigation actions and for them to have different levels of scalability. This is what ultimately kind of leads us in the direction of an exchange. And so the next couple slides, what I'm going to do is demonstrate how this program can operate. I'm going to go through 9 very specific steps, starting with the program initiation, which will happen once, and then talk about several periodic steps, the kind of day-to-day operations, and the last few steps are also periodic. The purpose here is, so I'll go into some detail. This gives you the overall framework of what this program could look like and how it could operate. And depending on your day-to-day involvement or relationship to VMT mitigation, you may see this program from the beginning, its initiation through its startup, the first couple steps, and then the day-to-day operations kind of in the middle here. And possibly at the very end when we present on additionality and monitoring of the project. The point here is really just that, the more common or day-to-day steps will be here in the middle. But today we'll start from the top and work down. So the first step is to initiate the project. And so that would require an administrating agency. And since we're talking about a VMT exchange, we can call that administering agency a VMT exchange agent. If we were talking about a VMT bank, we can call it a bank administrator. But their first step is to fund the program and receive the necessary approvals to really bring the program into existence. The exchange agent would also develop the governing documents that outline and formalize the processes and procedures the program would adhere to, and ultimately develop the different legal agreements between the participants and the VMT exchange agent. And those legal agreements can take the form of operating or purchase agreements, to just name a few. Once you have the program up and running, the first step would be to develop a mitigation list. And this list would be developed in consultation with the partnering agencies. And it also would include a VMT mitigation action review team. This review team is an entity charged with providing third-party oversight of the VMT mitigation action selection and evaluation process and the overall program evaluation. It'd be a multidisciplinary group that could be housed within the VMT exchange agent or the program sponsor or operate independently. The mitigation actions on this list would include the 3 categories that Kelly just presented on. Once we have a list of specific mitigation actions, we would quantify the VMT exchange agent would quantify the VMT reduction and develop a cost estimate for each of those. For this example, we're going to have 3 specific mitigation actions with different amounts of VMT reduction and cost, just to illustrate the overall process. I'll note that as a part of the TAC, we did go into great detail of thinking about the broad universe of possible VMT reduction items and how to select those to be eligible for this mitigation list. You can find more details in the draft report about the selection criteria that were identified in that process. Program's up and running, you have a list, and you've quantified the reduction, and you know what those costs are. So participating in the program, we're starting to jump into the kind of day-to-day steps here. So a lead agency is reviewing a development project and identifies the need for a VMT reduction. So the first step is for one development, and we'll just take each of these developments one by one. So the first development, it has a need for 50 VMT reduction. It has its pick of all 3 VMT mitigation actions. All things being equal, it's likely to pick the lowest cost mitigation action, in this case, action number 2. So the development would ultimately pay for that mitigation action to be implemented. Now, how that money moves from the developer to the mitigation action would be defined in the future legal agreements, but there's a couple possible ways, and it would be partly driven by what the mitigation action is and the implementing agency. If it's a program or a service, the money may move directly from the development or lead agency to the implementing agency for the mitigation action. If it's a capital improvement, that may take the money may move first to the VMT exchange agent, then to an implementing agency that has the ability to implement the capital improvements. So those kinds of details would be worked out, and there's a couple different ways that the money can move from the specific development to the actual mitigation action for implementation. We can move on to the second development. The second development has its choice of action 1 or 3 to mitigate its 50 VMT reduction. Action 1, all things being equal, is a lower cost and matches the amount of VMT that they need. So they might select action number 1. So you can see how this exchange, it's a list of different projects. It'd be kind of a long list, a bunch of different options. You can see how that list can be used as developments come in and have a need for VMT reduction. Then you have the final one, and we're illustrating kind of the extreme example of it's last on the list, but the final development is has a VMT reduction need of 100, and the last item on the list has a potential reduction of 150. So that's the one that they would ultimately select. They would take their money, pay for the mitigation action. There's a couple steps that would happen on a periodic basis. It wouldn't necessarily occur after every mitigation action is selected, but maybe it occurs on an annual basis. Certainly, as the list gets shorter, there would be several steps that the VMT exchange agent would take. One that may fall in the kind of annual category is the additionality and verification. This particular one is really testing that the reductions are real and verifiable. Was the actual reduction, was the estimated reduction what actually occurred? And testing for additionality, which is the concept of, for this money, there's an actual reduction. If the money wasn't there from this mitigation program, the reduction would not occur. Similar to testing for additionality and verification is just the overall monitoring and reporting process of this program. It would take the form of just a summary of the mitigation actions that are delivered, their overall effectiveness, and this information would be reported publicly in a summarizing document or presentation. And at some point, there will be a need to update the VMT mitigation action list, and a good time could occur after you've done your initial monitoring, where you have the most recent local information about your VMT reductions, and you go through a similar process of gathering ideas, selecting and updating the list so that there are additional VMT mitigation actions available for future land development that would potentially have an impact. They would be coming, the mitigation actions would fall again in the three categories that Kelly had identified earlier. So now I'll transition over to Chris.
Great. Thanks, Dan. And just a quick check that everyone on Zoom can hear. Maybe a thumbs up from Dan.
Yes.
All right, great. So thanks, Dan and Kelly, for walking through that. So a lot of work into this so far. We did distribute the draft report yesterday, so it's a pretty significant document, I believe 400 plus pages, but I would note that as part of that draft document, the first 40 or 50 pages is really the core of that document, and they're just hundreds of pages of appendices that you could dig into if you want more information. So looking at that document, there's an executive summary and introduction, kind of going through the problem and what we're trying to do here. A discussion of the stakeholder engagement and consensus that we went through. It includes a discussion of the project TAC and all of the process and feedback we received from the TAC, and also the stakeholder workshops and interviews we performed as part of the project. And then it really digs into the nuts and bolts, right? Like exchanges, banks, fee programs, how those would work, and what we're proposing here and how that would work. And then the recommendations. So the recommendation right now is a VMT exchange with SCTCA as that exchange agent. So we did do quite a bit of work with the TAC on some potential items that would show up on that initial list. So there's additional work that would need to be done to actually create that initial list or menu of items that could serve as mitigation. But we have a framework for scoring or selecting mitigation items as part of that. So Dan, can you move to the next slide, please? So looking at our next steps, so now that we have the draft report out and we have a recommended framework in place, as long as everyone's on board with continuing to look at an exchange and moving forward with those draft recommendations, we'll be holding a workshop later this summer to actually walk through the process. So we did hold a workshop early in the summer, walking through the steps that Dan outlined earlier, looking step by step how this would work. In workshop number 2, we want to take some example or conceptual project ideas and plug them into that process and see how it would actually work. So take a potential housing project or development project, with a number of units, square footage of different types of uses, plug it into there, walk it through each step, see what additional information we need and what additional work would need to happen as part of that framework. So we're looking at scheduling that potentially in August. So we'll send the invitation out to the project TAC and also this group if you'd like to participate in that. And based on feedback on the draft report and what we learned as part of the workshop, we'll go back and revise the draft recommendations and develop a final report. So just a few examples of the VMT mitigations that we've looked at, along with a project TAC that could be on that initial menu the development project could choose from to mitigate their VMT impacts include transit improvements, including service frequency improvements, extending Redwood Bike Share, expanding that program, working on our travel demand management program, Go Sonoma Commute Rewards, providing support for affordable housing, either through developing infrastructure around affordable housing sites or providing gap funding for projects, and then providing free or discounted fares for transit. So the whole list that we looked at as part of the TAC is about 30 or so items. So these are the ones that kind of floated to the top when we were thinking about feasibility and VMT reduction potential. So that's a big piece here. Since we're mitigating VMT, we need to be able to demonstrate that the projects or the mitigations would actually reduce VMT. So next slide, please. So I talked about the final report. We're looking at wrapping that up by the end of the year. As we've dug into this, it's very complicated. There's a lot of additional work that's going to have to be completed to actually initiate a program here in Sonoma County. So we're looking at being able to come up with a framework that we can keep working on implementing by the end of the year. But as I said, there's a lot of future work that we'll need to work on, which is listed out here on the slide, that's currently unfunded, that isn't part of this grant project, that we'll either need to go after additional grant funding to work on or fund in some other ways. So that includes, as Dan mentioned, developing that really detailed program governance and guidance document, outlining the different types of legal agreements that would need to be signed between lead agencies, project sponsors, and things like that to make this happen. Talk about monitoring and reporting and who would do that. Talk about including and incorporating new projects under the list of mitigations. And then, developing a plan to fund the administrative costs for the program. So someone is going to have to run the program. So in most cases, similar types of programs have assessed a percentage cost on those, the fees coming in to implement projects to cover admin costs, but there'd also be startup costs that would need to be covered. So we've talked a little bit about the criteria for selecting mitigation actions. So we've done a lot of that work already, along with the project TAC. We have a list of actions also that we could use to develop our menu of starting actions. But that's a starting point. We could include new items that are demonstrated to reduce VMT over time to the program if it's successful. We'd have to establish legal agreements with program participants. So each lead agency that participates, we'd have to have an agreement with them along with the project sponsors. So we're working with our legal counsel to map a lot of this out and figure out, what types of agreements would need to be in place and look at all of this from a secret perspective, right? So monitoring and reporting is very important in CEQA. So if you mitigate an impact, you have to monitor and report on, whether or not it's actually successful at mitigation, right? So in this case, we'd have to demonstrate those mitigations are actually reducing VMT. So that's definitely a function that would need to be ongoing. We may need to conduct a CEQA review or put together an EIR for the program. So still working on our legal counsel on that. And then finally, once we have all these other details figured out, we'd have to fund and initiate the program and get it going. So a lot to still happen. So as Dan mentioned, we did talk to our planning advisory, or maybe it was Kelly. So anyway, we talked to the planners this morning about it. They were supportive of continuing to study and exchange with SCTA as the exchange agent. So, and that's our recommended action, or our ask today, is just to get a read from the TAC or consensus that there's interest in continuing to investigate this type of format as we've presented today, and that's outlined in the draft report. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass things over to you, Mr. Chair.
Do you have any questions? Go ahead.
You mentioned the legal agreements with program participants and project sponsors meaning the agency that would implement a project like as Seminole County Transit to participate in the exchange for expanding their services. And then the other agreement is that the agency would compel developers who have BMT obligations to participate in the exchange. That's how that works.
Yeah, exactly. We need to have legal agreements with the parties on both sides, right? So lead agency, which are mostly the jurisdictions, right? And then the project sponsors, which could also be a jurisdiction if it's being implemented by the jurisdiction. But on our initial list, it's transit providers. There are some programs that we administer, so don't need a separate agreement for those. But for anyone implementing those mitigations, we need an agreement.
For housing, something like it would be a local agency, and we would have a pot.
There are a lot of issues with housing that we're still examining, so it's very complicated. So we're still in kind of a study mode. So that that won't be on that initial list because there's a lot to still work out and figure out there. And there are other things going on at the state level that could develop into a statewide VMT mitigation program focused specifically on affordable housing that HCD or the state would administer. So we're watching that as well and working with our legal counsel on the issues with affordable housing. So there are a lot, but there's a lot of interest in that being part of the program. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for all this work. This is really my first time taking a look at this, but clearly anytime you open a 459-page document, a lot of work and thought has gone into it. So thank you. I had two questions. The first being whether it is anticipated that if implemented, this would have any impact on the traffic impact fees that we're all collecting locally. And then the second being maybe why capital bike ped projects didn't rise to the top of that list that you identified of potential mitigation actions.
Yeah. So the first question, maybe I'll bounce over to Dan if he has any thoughts on that, and I can definitely talk to our legal counsel about that. I think this would be separate from that, and it's focused specifically on those VMT impacts, not other separate traffic impacts. On the active transportation projects, they're definitely on that initial list. But as far as the VMT reduction effectiveness at the regional scale, it was difficult to make the connection there. One thing that I believe Dan did mention that I'll emphasize again is, what we're describing here is a regional program that would be implemented at the county level. You could also implement something at the local level that could include things like bicycle pedestrian facilities, crossings, things like that. Hopefully the work we've done here, if your jurisdiction would want to do something like that at the local level, you can borrow a lot of this work that's been done to do that. So this is all pretty new. There aren't many programs in place at this point, but there are regional county programs and local jurisdiction programs in place. So there are a few examples of both. And so some of those smaller types of improvements may be more appropriate for a local program.
Okay, but that would be administered locally
Yeah,
as well, not by SCTCA.
yeah.
So I'm sorry, I'm trying to follow with the regional versus local. So if you're doing a local thing, you're not doing the regional thing, or you have the option of
You could
jumping back
do,
and forth?
you could do both. Yeah, so basically, and Dan, please jump in if you have any thoughts, but if you had a local program, you may have a list of actions there. And there'd be a regional program that if you chose to participate and you signed all the legal agreements, if a development came in and needed mitigation, you could direct them towards your local program or the regional program. So I see Dan nodding his head here. So it looks like I got that right.
You're doing great.
All right, thanks.
The VMT mitigation, is that a direct impact mitigation or just general mitigation in the local or the regional program?
So it's all CEQA based, right? So if a project as part of CEQA is determined to have a VMT impact, needs to be mitigated somehow. In a lot of cases, what's being done now is it's a case by case kind of ad hoc negotiation. Like you have a VMT impact, let's figure something out. This is what you can do to mitigate that. And there has to be an individual study that's shown that it's being offset. And it looks like Dan's ready to jump in here too in a minute. So it's all tied to that, right? And you were talking about local versus regional.
Yeah, so like you gave the choice of like the 3 projects in the example, so we would have to have 3 projects or projects that have VMT mitigation for an unknown development queued up ready for them to choose from.
If you're going to do it,
Yeah, what's that process? Like is the region gonna have that? And then to have a local program, are we gonna mimic that? And if we take a local project and push them into the regional VMT mitigation, it's very indirect mitigation, right?
yeah, it may not be within your jurisdiction, right? So yeah, I guess that's one of the things to consider in the regional versus a local program. So there's not necessarily a return to source component of a regional program. It's
Right.
looking at the holistic regional reduction of VMT.
Is there potential, I mean, again, sorry if this is a completely ignorant question, but is there potential for a program that does put some sort of nexus on the mitigation so that when there's a massive development project in a city, the mitigation action occurs within that city? But it's not administered. I don't think any of our agencies would look to administer programs. But it would be nice if there were some guardrails on this, I feel like, where we felt we got the benefits locally, the projects.
Yeah, so all of the analysis on the effectiveness of VMT reductions doesn't include that kind of local return. So that would need to be additional analysis. That's not something we've looked specifically at, and we'd need to consult with our legal counsel on what the rules are under CEQA and mitigation that could allow that. But that would need to be worked out as part of the guidance and administrative documentation that we put together as part of those next steps. So Dan, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, there obviously needs to be a nexus between the VMT impact and the mitigation. The amount of reduction is similar. So there's ultimately that requirement in CEQA, plus several others. Maybe one way to kind of think about this is that today you're able to do some VMT mitigation. It's usually on specific project sites. It's a little bit of reduction, but maybe you're not able to get to a full VMT reduction. So that leads to a very specific determination, a significance determination. But if you're able to implement additional VMT reduction at the citywide level through your own local program, you might be able to get a little bit more reduction. This program comes in, after you've done what you can locally, and there's still often a gap, and this could help fill that gap for additional VMT reduction. Because right now, VMT mitigation dollars are being left on the table. And, once you have those parts all together, you could potentially reduce your VMT impact to a less significant level. So, maybe that'll help with just kind of how to think about this. This is one piece of solving the VMT mitigation puzzle.
Yeah, and I would say as part of our previous work, we've talked about areas, projects that could be screened out as well. So they're, areas within a certain distance of a high quality transit stop or screened out from, VMT analysis. You can do VMT mapping in your jurisdiction that shows low VMT areas tied to a state threshold or a local threshold. Petaluma set a more aggressive VMT threshold. So you can map out on certain areas, and if a project is implemented there, it may not have to even, analyze its VMT impacts. It's just assumed that it's a low VMT project. So as Dan mentioned, this is kind of like after you do all that other stuff, if there's still a demonstrated impact, what do you do, right? You can't mitigate on site. So here's an option to be able to mitigate offsite.
I have a question, and I don't know if there's an answer, but perhaps Fair and Fears folks have seen this in action, but I'm a bit concerned that, we get complaints from our planning department and from our city council that we require too much from developers. So they ask us to ask for less. So at this point, the traffic department can get a developer to do small improvements like a flashing beacon or a protected bike lane for a block or two. But I'm a little bit worried that requiring this would mean that we couldn't get those spot improvements that are helpful directly in front of a development. I don't know if other jurisdictions are dealing with that who have VMT programs, but I'm a little bit concerned that our council will say, whoa, this might be a little bit too much to require.
In addition to the impact piece too.
In addition, yeah, so all those things together, like the spot improvements, super important. I also really support regional changes because that's also really critical, but then we can't always afford to do the bike ped improvements for or on behalf of the developers.
Yeah.
So I don't know, there might not be an answer.
Yeah, I can share some thoughts. I think Ian may have some as well. What you're expressing is a very common scenario with each individual development paying fees for capital infrastructure, and then you may, for a very specific project, have additional improvements that you're identifying that you're tying a nexus to. In this case, you described bike and ped. This would be an additional fee, but there is a requirement in CEQA to mitigate to the full extent possible. And so by having an agreement in place between the local agency and the VMT exchange agent, you've increased your options of potential VMT mitigation. And that is part of the justification for this overall program. In the end, we're trying to reduce VMT, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, support affordable housing and active transportation by having this program in place. So, it would potentially increase costs, but it's to address the VMT impact. So
I was also just going to add that, a program such as this provides certainty to developers in an area with VMT mitigation that is very uncertain these days. And so, developers generally like certainty. I'm not going to speak for all developers or all members of the development community, but a program such as this does kind of provide some certainty around the costs. And when we have been doing outreach as part of other such programs throughout the Bay Area and throughout California, the development community has welcomed that aspect of these sorts of programs to provide certainty for their calculations in an area that has a pretty high level of uncertainty these days.
So uncertainty versus certainty of cost, I have seen many times, as I'm sure everyone else in the room, that a developer is required to do a mitigation, build something, whatever, but then the costs come in and they're higher. And typically the city is on the hook for that, depending on how that development agreement or whatever has been written. how is that covered here? Like, when does the developer pay money? When is it determined? Because if we have a group of us sitting in a room saying this project is gonna cost 1.2 million and this is the savings, by the time the developer actually gets to either giving the money or building it, it's way more than that. How is that difference covered?
Yeah, so there will ultimately be a way to address that it would be in the next legal documents that you would address that level of detail. So I know that's not a satisfying answer for this moment in time. We know that that's a reoccurring challenge for current fee programs. When you're collecting the money, it takes you a while to get enough money to actually build the improvement. But there's also there's variability in the types of mitigation actions. Some of them, are programs or services that could be implemented pretty quickly, and they're scalable, right? So, those would be ones that you could implement pretty quickly and may not run into that same issue. For capital infrastructure, it's very possible you could, but the idea behind a VMT exchange is also that the mitigation actions are discrete enough and similarly sized to the amount of reduction that's needed, so they would be implemented pretty quickly. So that would be the idea behind the VMT exchange. So in some ways, the structure and nature of the program can address your need very specifically. In cases where there's a time or delay between collecting the money and when it's implemented, and the inflation costs that just they move fast lately. There have to be an agreement about how that cost is covered.
So, Mr. Chair, there is recommended action. The action is to direct staff to continue to investigate a VMT exchange with SCTCA as the program administrator.
And
So
the PAC heard this today?
they
or
did.
recently?
We didn't have quorum, so they couldn't take action, but they were supportive of the recommendation.
All right, so a motion and a second, or just head nodding?
I've got an additional question.
Please. I've got like 20, but I'm.
Yeah, lots of questions here, but it's probably being batted around in one form or another. But each of us, our agencies have a list of pathways, bike lanes, that we struggle to fund. And you've got this mitigation agency once in a while that develops an action list. I mean, the obvious question is, how do we get our projects onto that action list and woo those funds to our area?
So what we're thinking right now is we'd start with an initial list, but we'd have a committee made up of, perhaps some of you or PAC members to once a year look at the list of mitigations on that menu, take submissions. We could look out and see what's out there, take submissions, and then we have to do all the quantification. So there's substantial evidence in CEQA, right? So do the VMT reduction effectiveness calculations, the cost calculations, and then it could potentially show up on the list. But yeah, there'd be a regular refresh rate of getting things on the list. And one thing I did want to just point out as well is, this isn't intended to really fund a lot of stuff. It's, there are going to be good projects that aren't able to be constructed in those low VMT areas that you all want to see happen, and they don't have a way to mitigate the VMT, right? So this is a way for that to happen. And, a nice outcome of that is getting some of these projects and programs funded. So it's kind of that relief valve for good projects that do have VMT impacts.
With the projects that potentially, like a local project, make it on the I guess the whole regional list, what's the resolution of these projects? Have you got like a checklist? I mean, not everyone's going to sit on a stack of shovel-ready projects just in case.
Yeah, you like the project size,
Size, scope,
So.
We're gonna have the CEQA and the VMT go over that when the development comes in. But we kind of need to know the mitigation that we're trying to enact on them before that comes in.
Yeah, we're gonna have to demonstrate that it's actually reducing VMT. So it's gonna need to be at least far enough along to be implemented and then to be reported on and monitored over time. So I would take a look at some of the appendices in the report. So it goes through a list of some of those projects. So a lot of those specific details will still need to work out specifically for capital type projects, like how ready and how defined they are and how close to implementation they are. That's a really big, important thing that's going to need to be worked out, right? So because if a developer comes in and needs to reduce their VMT and pay someone to implement a project and it doesn't happen, someone's on the hook for not reducing the VMT. So those are all things that we need to work out as part of the next steps for sure. So
a lot of the things on your list seem to be, you know, the bike share, the transit, things that aren't necessarily projects in our definition or funding that we would get.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's more of an outlet when you can't mitigate on site. And the comparison I think of is like wetland mitigation. You can't do it here. You don't want to kill the project, so your money's going somewhere else and you're mitigating way more wetlands somewhere else. And that's kind of what we're talking about here, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So with that, you're looking for a motion to continue this fine work that you're all doing. We're not accepting the draft or anything. It's just support for the continued work.
Exactly. Yeah. And I would just say that no, even if we accept and adopt the final report, it doesn't obligate anyone to participate in the future.
And what happens if no one makes a motion and we all say no?
We'll need to go back to the drawing board. Yeah.
All right, do we have a motion?
Direct staff to keep going.
And the second?
Can you identify yourselves just because Dawn is
Yep.
new, so
Oh,
Just-
Edie
yes.
Mikado,
And a reminder, Edie, you are a soft talker. Make sure you're getting into the mic. There you go.
Edie Takata, City of Rohnert Park. I move to direct staff to continue the work on the VMT mitigation exchange program.
You can break into a song now too. As long as-
I cannot.
I'll take the second. Bjorn Griepenberg, City Petaluma. Sorry that you have to type that out.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right. So Chris, that took a little bit longer maybe than we thought it would. What are your thoughts on item 5, the travel demand model forecast, and whether or not we should either hold that off for the next meeting or wait to see how long the rest of this meeting goes? Because we also have another meaty item.
So I did check in with Adam and we're good to bump that for a
Okay.
future meeting. Yeah.
Okay, unless anyone strongly objects to that, that's what we will do. All right, thank you. So with that, we're on to item 6, the measures M and Go Sonoma invoicing obligation status for 24-25.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. These are standing items. I would just recommend that you all check it out and also remind you all that June 30th is the end of the fiscal year, so annual reporting will be due by September 15th. And invoicing and or estimates of your 24-25 invoicing are due to SCTA no later than July 7th. Please.
Thank you. Item 7.1 is informational only. That's the inactive federal obligation status. No presentation, but if if anyone has any questions. All right, so 7.2 SCTCA funding program cycle 2 application workshop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I am going to go through this. We promised you a workshop on the SCTCA funding program application. It's a pretty meaty program or pretty meaty application. It's different than it has been in the past. So what we wanted to do is walk you through what is being asked of you and give you a few reminders. Would you please? Thank you. Next slide, please. So we're going to go through the application. The application is available online on our website at this link, and talk about the attachments that can be put with the application, including maps, plans, if you have them. If you don't, that's fine, but preliminary plans would be great. Any photos, and then the funding nomination sheet. Next slide, please. Okey doke. Oh, I don't know what I did.
Not that button.
Close. No, I think I mashed too many buttons with gorilla fingers. There it is. Okay. Oh, yep, there we go. Okay. So, the primary page asks for summary information. This is all pretty basic. Asks for the project sponsor, the single point of contact information. I would like your email and your telephone, please. I do actually make phone calls. I find it easier to get a hold of people. So I do want your phone number if I can get it. A project manager, if that is different from the single point of contact. Project title, location, and description, and project type. So that is, I can't use the pointer on here, but in there you're looking at the type is those little boxes, they're check boxes, right? And then there is a section that says, please describe, just above that. That is project description. You can include your project description there. And then the schedule is asking for very basic delivery schedule. So it's just a begin, month, year, end, month, year. And that is for your delivery development phases. So environmental, design, right away, construction. Look at that, it worked. How exciting. The next page shows a table that covers the following or covers the eligibility and goals of the CTP and the regional transportation plan. So it covers whether or not the project is eligible for STPCMAC, that is Surface Transportation Program, and Congestion Mitigation Air Quality. That's just whether or not it meets the criteria. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're applying for that funding. It just is identifying whether the project is actually eligible for that funding. Minimum project cost, as you all recall, for the OBAG funds, it is a minimum of $250,000. For limited projects on a case-by-case basis, we can go down as low as $150K. I do not recommend it because federal funding is onerous and not worth the effort unless you are getting more than that amount. It also asks whether or not you have a current and or updated local road safety plan, LRSPs. We are working on putting something together to update those as a group, but I think David might want to say something else about that.
Just to let the group know, we did submit our application to USDOT yesterday, requesting fiscal year 25 safe streets and roads for all funds to update all 10 jurisdiction local road safety plans. That includes the 2 new ones for Cloverdale and City of Sonoma. So that will hopefully cover everyone, and we'll hear back in a few months whether or not we get that funding to do that plan update. If we do get the funding, we hope to have it done by the end of June 2027. So that would make it so that everyone's in compliance with this.
Next page. The next table is simply the project investment by mode. It's very basic. It should break out the percentage by mode that adds up to 100. If it's simply a bike ped project and nothing else, then it's 100% bike ped. If you are also including shoulders and pavement, then break it out by auto and transit and bike ped, or if there's some other mode included. Next one. So now down to application categories. So the rest of the application is, I mean, you've all looked at it, hopefully at least once. But it's a much meatier application than it was in the past. We are trying to make sure that we are asking you the right questions to get to the evaluation criteria that we are using to judge the projects. So now we have 12 categories on the application. The text boxes do not have character limits, but as a general rule, it should keep the narrative to the page that it's on. So those boxes can expand, but do try to keep the boxes to the page that the box occurs on. That should help. If you need more space than that, you could probably use it. I'm not looking for pages and pages of narrative on each application. I mean, the application is already 20 pages long. You don't need to add a lot more to it. Where the application asks for attachments, maps, and etc., you can enter a reference in the box to a separate file attachment. Just tell us what that is called, the title of the file, and attachments accordingly. So if you are including an attachment that says maps, you can include all of your maps because it does ask for multiple maps within the application. You can include all the maps in one PDF. Just make sure that each of the maps is labeled so that we can tell which one you're referring to. And then in the text box that's provided in the application, tell us what that file is called. So map file 1 or whatever you want to call it, that doesn't matter, just as long as we know what we're looking for so that we can easily find the reference. So for the equity priority communities or EPCs, we're asking for a map of the project boundaries, access and destination. That would be to provide a detailed map showing the EPC boundary in relation to the project. If there isn't an EPC, that's okay. You can provide census population and median household income, even if it's not in an EPC. And then you want to identify the equity priority community if it is benefiting an EPC. And then you can also include direct benefit information, which addresses a gap or deficiency identified by the equity priority community. So hopefully you've been doing engagement. The community in question has said, hey, we could really use bike lanes on X street, or we could really use a gap closure, or some other request that the community has made. Go ahead and include that kind of information here. This is where you can provide a narrative about the benefit to the community, even if it doesn't qualify as an EPC. So there's nothing preventing you from making the case that it is a community that is in need, even if it's not an equity priority community. You won't get the equity priority community points, but you will get points for serving a needy community.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
The EPC map, is that a separate map, or can we show the EPC boundaries on the map that shows project location?
You can do it that way,
Okay.
if that's easier. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. If it turns into something that's too busy, then you're welcome to separate it. But if you can convey that information simply, yes, you can combine them.
Okay.
So the next item is for potential mode shift. So you want to talk about the mode shift that the project will address. is the project addressing a need that could affect mode shift? Is there a substandard condition or existing facility? Is there a lack of connectivity or mobility? So the second portion of the project, so that first portion is just identifying the need, right? Identifying what the project needs to address. And then the second portion is how the project will affect that need. So describe how the project will affect mode shift. Is the project providing new transit route? Is it providing, or is it closing a gap in a bikeway that will encourage students to bike to school? Or the project is removing a barrier to a connected facility, something like that. Next item is collisions and safety. So we do ask for a map of the influence area for a plan or program or a project location, history of collisions resulting in fatalities, including the data sources that you're using. So here you can use heat maps, summaries, and reports that can be attached as necessary. The parameters for the data per project type are provided. So like, how close is it? You know, how the parameters are on the application itself, like within 250 feet of the edge of the project or the issue is where you're supposed to, you know, where the accidents are occurring. That's the kind of data that you're supposed to be providing. So all of that information is included on the application.
And Shauna, just if you're going to add for this, if you're say doing something like a new facility, like a new class 1 parallel to a busy roadway where you have a lot of collisions on that road, you won't necessarily have collision data for your new facility, but you can use that collision data on that adjacent route to show where the need is and how you provide that safer facility next to it.
Can we use the collision database from our LRSPs, or do we need to provide updated to the minute?
Well, you should, I mean, use what you have available to you. I mean, if you have, I would go to the sources in the application for the heat maps, but if you have that if you have information in there, you can include that as well. And just include your source.
Yeah, the UC Berkeley's Tim's website is pretty user friendly. You can pull data directly from Switters with that and make your own maps through that website. So it's a pretty useful source.
The application also asks for how many years of collision data were used in the heat maps. And for plans and programs, you should describe how users will be educated about safety hazards and encourage safe behavior. So if your application is not for an actual project, but for a plan or a program, then presumably that plan or program is going to do some sort of outreach, and how is it going to make a difference? If it's not a plan or program, you can skip that part. So on collisions and safety, the second section is about safety countermeasures. You should describe how the project, program, or plan will remedy potential safety hazards that contribute to injuries and fatalities. If there are no injuries or fatalities, but the project will still fix a problem, elaborate on that in the narrative. Use public information and illustrate the issue. Countermeasures must directly address underlying factors that are contributing to the occurrence of collisions. So provide backup for your proven countermeasures. So who says that it works? Is it FHWA? Is it AASHTO? Is it some other authority? So let us know who it is that's your source for this information that these countermeasures are effective. The next item is improved public health. So the application asks you to describe health status of targeted users on the project, program, or plan, and how were health benefits considered when developing the project. This means you need to be doing a little bit of research before you're actually moving forward with the project. Did you contact a local health department or a school district to determine how users might benefit? You should thoroughly document the contact, who you talked to, when, was it by phone, was it by email, was it in person at a meeting? But document how and when you got that information.
Did you want to touch base on public participation?
I believe that's below that. Did I miss it?
I have public participation is number 4 and health is 5.
Oh, I must have mixed them up. I apologize. I thought I was working on this presentation up until the last minute, so I apologize. Did I miss? Sorry, I'm gonna go through mine. Yeah, I'm missing it. I may have deleted that slide. I apologize. So public participation is
It's no longer required.
is huge. So, sorry, I was on mode shift. We talked about that, collisions and safety. Did that, improve public health. All right, so before that, let's talk about public participation. Because I did have a slide about it. I don't know where it went. Public participation should have outreach and engagement. You should be receiving information back on these projects. You should document how the information was retrieved. Did it go to city council? That's great. Did it only go to city council? Was it a consent item? Was it a, general item? Was it as part of a workshop that you did of a bigger thing, maybe a plan or a program? Did you do something specific for this project alone? And was an alternative language provided? Was the location where you held the meeting ADA accessible? These are the kinds of things that are should be documented in your narrative. And I apologize that slide somehow got deleted because it was in there. And I will say again, I can't say this often enough, refer to the rubrics and the criteria. Everything that you're going to get judged on is in the criteria. You can see how we have to judge the projects. So read through those and determine whether or not your narrative is addressing what we are going to have to judge you on. So now we get to improve public health. Describe the health status of the targeted users of the project plan or program. How were health benefits considered? We talked about this. Did you reach out to sources, health department, school, etc.? Describe how the project is expected to promote healthy communities and provide outreach for targeted users. And you should describe the strategies that will be employed to promote healthy communities and how the project will provide outreach to targeted users. Okay, we did go through that, sorry. But leveraging other funds. The application should show all of the other committed funds. So the amount that you're asking for plus the committed funding that you have. Points are awarded for this item in direct proportion to the matching funds provided. So there is 1 point for every 2% match provided. A maximum of 20 points are provided for 40% or more matching funds. That's just a direct result.
You said committed.
Yes.
In some cases, if you have a project and you have not yet put it into your CIP, doesn't have an approved budget.
Yep.
But you have council support
Yes.
to fund the remainder of that. Is that considered committed?
I would say yes.
Okay.
But let me go to the next slide, which brings us to the nomination form. It's called the nomination. The file is called the nomination form. We all know it as this funding sheet that we use. So I wanted to go through this a little bit more specifically, because I think this will help answer your question. So the top table is automatically calculated. That's that gray area. So there's 3 lines there, and I apologize it's so tiny. It was really hard to make it all on the page. But those first 3 yellow highlighted items are essentially just the project name, the jurisdiction, and then the implementing agency. So if it's for the county, but Regional Parks is implementing it, then it'd be county and Regional Parks as opposed to county and SoCo High or something like that. If it's the same, then it can be listed as the same. That next section down, all the cells that are all gray, that section is auto-calculated. You don't have to put anything in that section. those, all the information that you put on in the rest of the form will auto-populate that section. So each fund source has two tables. So if the first one is the existing, and the second one just down below that. So the green titled one, and you will list the fund source that you are considering. That is the existing, and then there is the proposed. Existing is used for the committed funds, previously awarded grants, or committed local funding. And proposed is used for the grant request, listed as SCTA funding program cycle 2, or local funds expected but not yet committed, general fund, development fees, etc. And then the yellow highlighted sections indicate where you where your input is requested. And the very last table, that bottom one, that is all yellow with the single column that's gray at the end, that one is for funding needs that are outside the current funding cycle, or if you anticipate asking for funding that is not yet granted, like local partnership program competitive funds, or solutions for congested corridor program funds, that kind of thing, where that's what you're asking for. You're already doing an application that's not part of this funding program, but you're going to ask for it, but it's not committed yet, right? You haven't applied for it, or maybe you have, but you haven't received it yet. Then that's where you would put that funding. Or if it's outside of, like, you're asking for early developmental funds because this is a huge project, and so you're going to ask for environmental funds, or you're going to ask for design funds, but that construction is going to be outside of the funding years that are covered by this cycle 2 program, then you can put those funds in this section. So next section is project readiness, which is we're asking you to provide detailed information on completed milestones. If the milestones are shown as completed, attach the documentation, such as a project initiation document, a certified environmental document, approved or partial plans, specifications and estimates. Points will not be awarded without provided documentation. So don't just tell us that, yeah, we did environmental, and not provide us with the document. We need to see that too, please.
And I should note, there is sometimes a question about right-of-way completion. If you're doing a project entirely within your right-of-way and you have no temporary construction easements or utility adjustments that you need to let us know, and then you get the points for that. But if you have something that's going to need TCs or utility coordination, then you won't get the points.
A question related to this, if we've already funded completing CEQA, can we use those funds paid in the past for a match for the total project cost?
So in the past, we have said, if you're funding the earlier developmental phases, you can use that as a match if you're only asking for construction funds. If you're funding all of the other developmental phases, then yes, we would say you could use that as match.
And that's going to come through on the yellow and gray chart that you had anyway.
It should, yes.
And that's how we would calculate how much we're
So whether it counts or doesn't count, you're still going to get to show it.
So for project location, we're asking you to describe the location of the project in relation to community activity centers, for employment centers, transit hubs or stations, schools, recreation areas, compact commercial areas, or residential concentrations or downtown community cores. Does the project provide or improve connection to these CACs? This is what we're asking for in this section. Does the applicant have any jurisdictional policies that have been adopted that support protection, preservation, or production of housing in all income levels? You should describe those policies and where they can be found, and include references to those documents. And then describe how the project is located in the area. So you can describe the location's level of street connectivity for vehicles, bicyclists, pedestrians, and transit. Is the project within a quarter mile of those community activity areas? Are the major thoroughfares closely spaced? Was it what is the designated speed? Are the streets designed to accommodate pedestrians, bicyclists? Will the project change that? That's the kind of thing you include in that narrative. Emission reduction, project cost effectiveness of emission reductions, and describing the project strategies to reduce emissions is what we're asking for in this section. The application provides links to several tools depending on the project type. Select the appropriate tool for the project. So there's one for EV stuff, there's one for transit, there's one for bike peds. So, you know, select the one that applies. And then I wanted to remind you all that SCTCA is offering technical assistance for items such as this, and the deadline to indicate the need for that type of assistance is tomorrow, June 27th. So if you have not already done so, please let us know if you will be seeking technical assistance for any of the sections of the projects or of the application, but we do need to know specifically what you're asking for. It can't just be, we need help with all of it. You know, or we need help on all 10 of our projects on emissions reductions. We need to know what the project is, what you're asking for specifically so that we can help find the right consultant to help you provide that information.
And just to add, we do have an email address set up for SCTCA funding program. If you could send those email requests for technical assistance to us, we can get back to you as soon as possible. We have several of our consultant firms on the call right now listening in. We're getting them under contract and should have them under contract fully by Monday. So this will give us a good month or so for them to be able to help you out. And the sooner we can know your needs, the better assistance they can provide you.
The next section is employment opportunities. The application asks you to describe how the project construction or implementation would positively impact employment opportunities in the community. So will the construction of the project create jobs? Will the projects provide access to job centers or large employers like hospitals or big box stores or something along those lines? So you can kind of go at it a couple of different ways, whether or not you're saying construction itself is going to provide jobs, or whether you're going to say, you know, it's the construction of the project is going to provide access to jobs. Just make sure you're clear about which one it is. The next section talks about congestion, reliability, and traffic flows, and asks you to describe how the project will reduce congestion, increase reliability, and improve traffic flow in and around the project area. So will the project affect traffic congestion by increasing flow, by installing roundabout, or provide better travel time or travel time reliability? Infrastructure condition is asking you to describe the project, how the project will improve the condition of the transportation assets, such as pavement, culverts, bridges, and public transit assets to maintain a state of good repair. So not every project is going to get points in every category, but the idea is that if you're not doing if your project is more along the lines of pavement rehab, we still want you to know that we're valuing fix it first and maintaining a system in good repair. So that's why these questions are in here, so that you are able to get some additional points if your project might not score as high on the emission reduction section, that kind of thing. So we are asking that you include demonstrable performance measures such as payment condition index, or remedying a substandard condition such as vertical clearance or insufficient sidewalk width. Include all of that bit in your narrative. And that brings us to the tips. We're at the end. So our tips for completing the applications are: use the scoring rubrics. I can't say it often enough. Use the scoring rubrics and the evaluation criteria. I would also suggest looking to previous successful applications for ideas. Not necessarily in this program. You can, however, find all of the applications from cycle 1 online. Use somebody else's application if you want to, and use their wording if that gives you ideas. I would also recommend going to previous successful applications on CTC's website for ATP program or other larger projects, you know, they have all of their successful applications online. So you can use those as just idea generators for your narrative. Third is don't assume your evaluators are familiar with your community. You know, we all live in Sonoma County and we work and play here, but when it comes right down to super detailed stuff, provide that information in the application narrative. Don't assume that we know exactly where you're talking about, because we hopefully are going to have evaluation teams that are pretty diverse, and not everybody is going to know. So just make sure you provide all the information that the evaluators need to fully evaluate your project to the best effect.
Who will the evaluators be?
SCTCA staff, and then hopefully we will be looking to you all and additional people on your staff to have at least one outside person on each team. So we generally make up teams of about 3 or 4 people. And then, I mean, we don't have that many staff, right? But we're expecting a lot of applications. So we try to break it up into teams so that not any single person is having to look at 100 applications.
And so let's say somebody from one city volunteers, would they be viewing their own
No,
project? So you're just saying,
Nice try there.
Oh, we're
well,
gonna
I'm
make
just,
sure, we're gonna
because
make
either
sure
way,
that
it's
that's
kind
not
of,
happening.
it's either, you know, downgrading everyone else's is still helping yours. I'm just curious how that happens.
No, the jurisdictional staff will absolutely not have the opportunity to score their own applications. They will be.
But they're gonna be doing everyone else's and the other
Yeah.
random
And we're-
people, so.
We're relying on everyone's professionalism.
There will be teams, right? I mean, for example, ATP applications require the team to have consensus. So if one person on the team says, this is absolutely not meeting this threshold for this amount of points, then that team is gonna have to hash it out so that they all come to a consensus before we assign the point values.
Okay, that's a good method.
The attachments should complement your narrative and not replace it. Do not just attach something and go, all the information's in there, go ahead and read it. We need your narrative to say stuff, and then your attachments should support that. If you are providing more than one map, you can save it as one file. As I mentioned earlier, one PDF file is fine if you want to have multiple maps in that one PDF file. And then submittals should be made to the SCTCA funding program site or address that is listed up on the screen there. And you are welcome to use your own file share locations and send a link if the files are too big for direct submittal. So if you get a bounce back, you try to send it to us and then you get a bounce back, then if you guys have your own share site, send us a link, we will download your applications.
Do you know your size limit on what you can receive via email?
Whatever the county is.
Yeah, on the deadline, is it by 5 o'clock that day or midnight?
It would be by close of
The
business.
business.
Close of business on August 8th.
It's when you're. ending-
Planning ahead, David.
My business ends at midnight.
This is the government. We stop at 5
Huh.
on the books anyway. And that's it. So we're at the end. There you go. So any other questions? I know that was super dry and this is the first time I've had to do this. So hopefully I'll polish it up and get it better next year and include the public information, the public engagement slide. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us. All of our contact information is up there. You guys know how to get a hold of us, but it's David and Margot and myself are all available to answer your questions. So don't hesitate to reach out.
You might have said, but when do we hear what the consultants might be able to help with?
So I'm hopefully having all those task orders executed either today or by Friday. So I'll be able to look at all the requests we've gotten in so far and hopefully all the requests we get by tomorrow and see who can do what and how much level of effort it's gonna be within the budgets we have.
Okay.
So once we figure that out, we'll be in touch, and we may have them get in touch with you as well, and then have some follow-up questions and see what data you can provide, so that can help refine how much level of effort it would be.
Sure.
Any other questions? How about online? Nothing? All right.
But I've got one. So besides missions, what do you anticipate would be the ones you'd lean heaviest on?
I mean, maps, plans, just tell us what you need, but tell us specifically what you need. So you've got a project and you need to know, you need a preliminary plan, or you need, something that would sketch it out. It's not gonna be, it's not gonna be certified engineer stamped thing, but we can help provide that kind of thing. If you need help with mapping, if you need help with whatever portion of the application that you need help with, just let us know what it is.
Yeah, and for example, another question we've gotten from one jurisdiction was, can the consultant set up a website so you can get feedback on some of your project ideas and get public comments on a little map where they can drop little comments on it? That can help inform your public engagement answer.
Exactly.
You anticipate that? I mean, I guess you'll see that if we're asking the same things, then across the board,
Do you anticipate that if you see the same kinds of technical assistance requests across the board, that the consultants might be providing the same thing across the board, which will also help evaluation wise? For example, if we also, many of us said, I need help on the health section, but instead of each of us contacting Kaiser and Providence and County Health, that across the board, and several of us said that, do you think that maybe the consultant will say, well, we'll do it on behalf of everyone, and then you'll know as evaluators that the data will look the same or comparable?
Possibly, but I think that it depends. I mean,
on what
my
the request is.
expectation is, that the locations will differ, right? Like, Sonoma County is fairly uniform, but we have, communities that are lower income that might have different health issues than communities that are higher income and don't have that.
Yeah, and I would suggest reaching out to DHS as well, Department of Health Services. They may have epidemiological data on specific communities, like Shauna said, and say this neighborhood in Roanoke Park has a higher instance of asthma than this other neighborhood, and be able to tell that narrative as part of your project, and not just cut and paste the same kind of generic boilerplate language that if we have one consultant just reach out to Kaiser or someone, that's probably what they're going to get.
Yeah, we're gonna get countywide data, and I think what we're looking for is something a little bit more granular than that.
And if not, tell your story and tell with narrative and have a kind of a qualitative versus a quantitative explanation. I'd also suggest teaming up with your community development departments, because they deal with a lot of other stuff that we don't generally deal with in public works departments, and they may be able to help on some of these questions.
You gonna finish your work by 5 o'clock?
11:59.
No other questions? Nobody online still? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item is the upcoming SCTCA meeting of July 14th. Is there anything we want to highlight about that?
Sure, I can share the agenda. I've got it open. All right, so we got our agenda for July, I believe it's 14th set up. We have our minutes from June 9th, our Ghost Sonoma quarterly reporting. Thanks everyone for getting that in. That'll be also going to our Citizens Advisory Committee meeting on Monday for their input. We have a couple appropriation requests, one for Petaluma Lynch Creek Trail Project, one for Sebastopol Bodega Avenue Bike Lanes Project that we have some outstanding questions on, so we'll check back in with the city on that one. We will be asking approval and allocation requests for the Resilient State Route 37 long-term project, Highway 37 121 interchange from MTC. So that'll be we got them there. And then also our legislative update. Those are all the consent calendar items. On the regular calendar, we'll have an update from BC on the Equitable Building Electrification Action Plan, I believe. We'll be having an update from Dana on the Mascots Transit Planning effort. Chris will be having an update on the VMT mitigation program, draft program framework. And then Adam, I believe we'll be moving this to next month, or excuse me, in September. The CTV performance assessment is going to be pumped out as well for the board. And then our just standard activities reports at the end of the meeting. And that's the agenda.
Thank you. Not seeing any questions. Roundtable discussion. Anyone have anything they want to share? Good news, good bids, exciting projects.
County Council is cautioning us for grant agreements with federal agencies, and we will need to go through council for any future agreements. You've probably been hearing that too. Just weighing in on us working on this application now, and some of these are federal funders.
Yeah, we are thankful for the county kind of taking the lead on that. Assuming others have seen that, it came through for us for FAA first with the grant insurances saying that the city will cooperate with ICE and not do anything DEI. So now it's a whole, do we sign it? Do we not sign it? Lots of issues there. I assume others are going through the same thing.
Yes, and as we've communicated to those of you involved in our fiscal year 24 Safe Streets for All grant, we're having that same issue with Federal Highway Administration on the DEI language. Is not so much of a concern, it's the cooperation of ICE language that would put local jurisdictions at risk of not complying with state law on that. So our fiscal year 24 Safe Streets and Roads for All grant is held up for now. And as mentioned, I believe the county council is talking to all your city attorneys on the matter. I think a number of you may be looking at that further.
So the lined out edits that you guys submitted back, did you hear anything?
They were rejected.
They just flat out rejected them. They said no changes. Okay.
So I can't disclose any next steps yet, but we'll see.
All right. Any other great news like that?
I should know right now, the California Transportation Commission is actively meeting in Sacramento to approve the Senate 1 competitive program recommendations. That includes funding to extend SMART to Healdsburg and to the north, and then also funding recommended for the second phase of the near-term Sears Point to Merrill improvement project on Highway 37. So as soon as we get off this meeting, I'll be jumping on to watch that webinar and hopefully have some good news soon.
That is good news. All right, nothing else? Sorry, Adam, for the delay. All right, with that, we're adjourned.
Yeah, that's pretty good.